Hello everybody, Miss Mac here. And of course, I have my trusty paperback version of Chains. And we are reading chapter 15. So follow along. Join me on page 93, won't you? Grab your book, because as always, you should be annotating right along with me. Now, at the end of the video, I'm going to turn my cup around so you can see what's written on front of it. And that's going to be a question on your quiz. So make sure you watch all the way to the end. Chapter 15, page 93, Saturday, June 22nd, 1776. As for young children liable to be attacked with this distemper, you must begin with giving them wholesome food. Apply it to their heads, small plaster of treacle, which must be renewed every 8 days. Let them always have some pleasant and agreeable smells. Let their common drink be aromatized and sweetened with a little cinnamon, anise, coriander, and sugar. Noel Chamel and Richard Bradley, Family Dictionary containing the most experienced methods of improving estates and of preserving health. So this is no doubt a recipe for a child. And it's some type of healing or cure for something that ails a child. And I'm wondering why Halls Anderson puts this particular primary source document at the beginning of chapter 15. So that's a question that I want you to be able to answer when we get to the end of chapter 15. So make sure that you're listening carefully. Remember, it says, as for young children liable to be attacked with this distemper, which is the same thing. Distemper is illness or disease. You must begin with giving them wholesome food. So one thing you need to do with children who are ill is give them wholesome food. So remember this primary source document as we read and annotate chapter 15. Page 93, guys. It's the devil, Madam screamed as I opened the door to the kitchen. Now remember, at the end of chapter 14, Ruth hears a blood-curdling scream in the kitchen, drops the bottle of wine that she's serving Mr. Lockton and his two buddies, and runs down to the kitchen. And so we open chapter 15 with Madam screaming, "It's the devil!" As I opened the door to the kitchen, Ruth had fallen at her feet and lay there, her body shaking violently. Peas were scattered across the floor. What I feared most had happened. Madam snatched the broom from Becky's hands and raised it over her head. "She has the devil in her." "No, madam, it's an illness," I cried. "An ailment, nothing more." Madam brought the broom down on the small, twisted body. Ruth couldn't raise her hands to protect herself. The seizure held her fast, her arms and legs stiff and trembling, her eyes wide but not seeing. I would have an annotation, underline, circle, or highlight something in that last paragraph, and then my gist would be Ruth is having a seizure. Now, which disease that we know now today is characteristic of seizures? That's something that you might want to research later. But for right now, you have a gist about this fit, if you will, that Ruth is having. So join me on page 94, top of page 94. "Out, devil!" Madam shouted as she again raised the broom over her head. "No!" I threw myself on top of my sister. The broom came down on my back once, twice, but it didn't matter. I had to keep her safe until the storm passed. The broom handle cracked, and Madam tossed it aside. I heard Becky yelling something. Then Lockton's loud voice boomed, "Enough!" The room quieted, except for the soft bumping of Ruth's limbs on the floor. I looked up. Madam held a chair, prepared to throw it at us. Her husband pulled it out of her hands. Ruth's body suddenly went limp. "What is the meaning of this?" Lockton asked. "She's possessed," Madam sputtered. "I will not have a demon child in my house, Elihu." I ran my hand over Ruth's face and spoke to her softly. Her eyelids fluttered and her mouth moved. "Come back to me, baby girl. Come back, Ruth," I whispered. "Wake up now. It's gone, blown away. Come back, Ruth." She looked confused. She always did after a fit. I helped her to sit up. A little blood had soaked through the kerchief at the back of her head where it had hit the floor. The wound the wound would need some cobwebs. Now remember earlier in the chapter, we know that Isabel collects cobwebs. So here we're finding out what those cobwebs are used for, to dress or to fill up a wound and stop the bleeding. So I would just there underline or circle the wound. The wound would need some cobwebs, and then do a little gist about what those cobwebs are used for. Okay, let's continue. Bottom of page 94. Lockton sent Becky to the study with the wine. He bade Madam to sit on the chair she had nearly broke over my head, took a seat himself, and addressed me gravely. Your sister has the falling sickness, he said. Does this happen often? No, sir. Ruth wiped her tears on my sleeve. This is not a matter of inquiry, Madam said. I will not have evil in my house. Becky walked in, poured cider into a chipped mug, and handed it to Ruth, who took a large mouthful. Madam took a step backward. The child's curse will poison us all. I want her sold, Elihu. Sold today. Sold? Wife, started Lockton. You can't sell her, I burst out. Hold your tongue, girl, Madam commanded. Ruth drank the last of the cider and stood up. Lockton reached out and set his hand on her shoulder. They are sisters, Anne. One must remember that. Let's stop there. I think this is really interesting that old plotting Mr. Lockton is kind of coming to the girl's defense right now, because Mrs. Lockton wants her out. She wants her sold. She doesn't care. But Mr. Lockton, surprisingly, is trying to comfort his wife and says to her, hey, girl, they're sisters. Okay, let's continue. They are sisters, Anne. One must remember that. Please, madam, I said. She's too little. She'll be hurt. The room fell silent except for the plopping sound of peas falling to the bottom of a wooden bowl. Ruth was picking up the peas that she had spilled. The sound reminded me of pebbles plunking into a deep pond. Becky carried the mug of cider to Madam. Look here. The little one is already back to her chores, and she did a fine job sweeping earlier. So here we see, let's highlight, circle, or underline here. This is also Becky coming to the girl's defense. So I would highlight, underline, or circle that whole little paragraph there, where Becky is saying the little one is already back at her chores, and she did a fine job sweeping earlier. And I would just, Becky also comes to support Ruth and Isabel. How often do these fits take hold of her? Lockton asked me. Speak truthfully. Sometimes once a day, sir. Sometimes weeks go by. One a day? Madam's voice rose again. Ho, Lockton! The mayor called from the study. The master studied my sister, then tugged his waistcoat over his belly. The girl is harmless and useful, he said. She will work in the kitchen with Becky. That is my decision. Do not disturb me again with womanly prattle. Hold up, wait a minute. So now Mr. Lockton is laying down the law. He's like, girlfriend, we're keeping her. She works well. She can work in the kitchen. Get over yourself and don't interrupt me anymore. Okay? So he says, do not disturb me with womanly prattle. So prattle is like nonsense, shenanigans. He ain't trying to hear it. So make sure you highlight, underline, or circle that and put Mr. Lockton shut it down. He's not trying to hear it. The kitchen fell silent as the master walked away. When we heard the door to the study close, Madam pointed at Ruth. Don't let her near the milk. She'll curdle it. And don't get used to her presence here. Elihu will soon see reason. So stop for a moment. Is Mrs. Lockton going to obey her husband? I wonder. And why do you think she doesn't want Ruth near the milk? To curdle the milk. If the milk curdles, that means it's spoiled. So she says, don't let her near the milk. She'll curdle it. And Don't get used to her presence. Elihu will soon see reason. Interesting. Guys, make a prediction right there, right here and now. If you don't write it down, make a prediction in your mind about who's going to win this fight. Mr. Lockton or Madam Lockton? Continuing on page 96. She stalked off, leaving a sour smell in the air. Ruth crawled under the table to pick up the peas that had rolled there. I watched her and tried to stop my hands from shaking. What will happen to us? No way of telling. Becky pulled an eel from the basket. It's near impossible to hire help, what with folks running off in the fear of war. She cut off the eel's head. Long's you two can stay out of trouble. She grabbed the eel's skin at the neck and pulled it all the way off. I imagine you'll be safe enough. I bent down to help Ruth with the peas. Boom! That's the end of chapter 15. Make sure you have your gist. It's a really short chapter, but a very important chapter. And you'll find out why when you get your quiz. So I'll be back in about 2 minutes with chapter 16. Hold tight. Stay tuned.